Right. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us on this Thursday. How we're in mid-June, I have no idea, but it is a speeding summer, that's for sure. But a quick introduction. I know many familiar names that are joining or have been on the call. My name is Kelsey Jones. I'm the president of our Women's Network at Salesforce. And we are continuing this Striving to Thriving series. So as many know, it's been a 7-part or 7-session series that we've been hosting starting early summer, back on May 7th. So even in the spring, started with Swimming the Sea of Uncertainty. And we've been joined by 2 amazing groups within our community, WeThrive.live and Integrating Women Leaders. So you're going to hear from both of those groups as we kick off today. But I did want to kind of go through and kind of reflect for a couple of minutes. We did have a 2-week pause for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, right, we didn't just start all of this back in, gosh, it's been over 90 days now. And it started, right, with a global pandemic. Then on top of the global pandemic came a global economic crisis that we're truly still in. Move on from that, we've now added on global social injustice. And at Salesforce, it's very important to us that we took a moment over the last couple of weeks and just stepped back and wanted to reflect on what's our purpose, what are we here for, and how do we make sure we are giving back to the community, specifically the Black community. So I just wanted to share 2 slides before I hand it over to our main speakers today on how we at Salesforce are reflecting and why the importance of stepping back for the last 2 weeks has been instrumental, even for me personally. So I'll just read verbatim on the slide. We stand with the Black community against racism, violence, and hate. Now, more than ever, we must support one another as allies and speak up for justice and equality. I think it's really important here, specifically as we've been reflecting, and I personally have been reflecting, coming from my background, and I've been having some very difficult, uncomfortable conversations, and that truly has been one of my first steps besides educating myself. And I think it's so important that we all just take time to do that. So these last 2 weeks have, I feel like, been some of the hardest 2 weeks, absolutely, of 2020. Right? It's the compiling and compounding effect of those 3 massive major things that we've never had to deal with to date. So I think it was just really important that we all took a step back and reflected. And the leaders of both of these organizations, Kim and Rebecca, their support and their pivot and their help in this process, we couldn't have chosen 2 better groups to partner with on this Striving to Thriving series. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you. And with that, the last slide I want to speak to before I turn it over is, how do we do all of this? Nobody has all the answers. Nobody's going to have all the answers. But what's important is that each of us on this call, specifically, each of you, we have the ability to go back into our organizations and truly lead with empathy. And as women, I think it was even one of the very first sessions that Kim's first slide that she opened up with was, the countries that are doing the best or progressing through this global economic crisis and pandemic are the countries that have female women leaders. They're the ones who are leading with empathy, who are having compassion. And I think it's just so important that we all do that, because we don't have the answers. We don't always know what to say, but it's important that we understand that this conversation is triggering and that we have to practice empathy. And we have to care for ourselves, but also for one another, specifically in our Black community. So we stand with our Black community. And I love that we are kind of moving into a your story component of this series. I don't think we could have even tried to put this series together in this way. So again, from the bottom of my heart, on behalf of Salesforce Women's Network, Kim from IWL, Rebecca from WeThrive.live, thank you. And let's go ahead and kick off the last half of this remaining series. So with that, Kim, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Well, hello, everybody. I'm going to lead with a question, and if you could jump on chat. What do you think this is a picture of? Can somebody just jump in here? Whoops. Somebody just tried calling me here. Sorry about that. Let me get back. I just lost you guys. Holy cow.
Always pivoting and learning.
Let's see here. Well, okay. Somehow I just lost you, but I think I can go on here. This is actually a kite, and I'd like to tell you that story. There's a favorite place of mine on the north side of Indianapolis. It's a lake, kind of not too far from Keystone at the Crossing. And my friends affectionately call it even Lake Kimbo. And I was walking around it the other day, actually just on Sunday, and I saw these two sisters. I met them and chatted with them, and they were flying this kite. And these young girls were just so neat, Ireland and Veda. And I shared with them this story that every time I see a kite, it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes. And that is, if you put that up there, that, I've got to pull it up here. There we go. The kites fly highest against the wind, not with it. And it was actually Sir Winston Churchill that coined that wind quote. And I absolutely love it because, obviously what it's implying is that sometimes that the greatest challenges in life, our struggles, are the things that really make us soar. And it's funny, you get to a certain age and you start to really connect the dots of why certain things happen in your life, why this was part of your story. And I think that you really begin to recognize that those challenges and those struggles make you an even better version of yourself. And I've learned that accepting those things that happen, and also being grateful for them, those are truly gifts. So I love kites. I was saying earlier in the tech check here that I'm actually working on a book, and it's going to build on this quote. So stay tuned. And another kind of phrase related to this that I love is that setbacks are really setups. And again, just really embracing them and recognizing that those challenges are awesome gifts to us. And just as Kelsey was saying, we've all had some rather unique gifts over the last few months through some of these challenges with the pandemic and the economic uncertainty, and certainly the racial and social injustice that is long overdue and coming to the forefront. And my challenge to myself, and I think all of us with this self-reflection, I'm grateful that, Kelsey gave us kind of this tee up of the importance of self-reflecting like we've been doing the last few weeks. But how do you come out on the other side of this? How do you soar even higher? I have been doing a lot of self-reflection, and I want to tell you a little bit about my own story, and it specifically relates to what is happening in terms of the Black community and just really the injustice that is, centuries in the making. My own story is that I was 9 years old growing up in Memphis, Tennessee, and I remember vividly the night that Martin Luther King was killed and the days after. And I'm actually in Atlanta right now visiting my parents. I just drove in last night, and we were chatting about it, and I remember it like it was yesterday. And I've been really thinking a lot about, all these years later, the opportunity to still change is so needed. And on Sunday, I was really drawn to watch one of our panels that we did in Louisville on our main stage a year ago in April. And it was the Papa John's Courageous Conversation. And let me tell you who was there. It was the COO, Mike Nettles, Victoria Russell, who is just an amazing person. She is their Chief of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. It was a relatively new role for her. And Lindsay Rayleigh, one of Victoria's team members. It was an amazing conversation. And I wanted to bring this up is because it was really an important part of even my personal journey and really walking the talk. Papa John's had been a sponsor for years. I'm sure you all are aware of some of the controversy with their CEO and some of his racial comments and really bad behavior. And I know it was a very challenging time for Victoria, for Mike, for many in that organization that knew that that was not reflective of who they were. And my board challenged me and said, I'm not sure that we should be doing this. And it was the appropriate challenge, because what it required was listening and really understanding points of view. And I think that's important when we talk about stories. It's important that we listen to other stories as we shape and write our own. And I can tell you that it was really important to me and ultimately the IWL board that we provide the platform for Victoria and Mike and Lindsay to share their story and how they wanted to make a difference within Papa John's. So for me, it was a really strong lesson in listening and the power there. And there was another really strong lesson that I wanted to share with you, and I had forgotten this actually. And it was from Mike Nettles at the very end of the panel, facilitated by Dawn G, who's a well-known anchor person there. She's like Miss Louisville. She asked all three of them, like, what's the one lesson that you learned in this Papa John's controversy and coming out the other side? And I absolutely love this comment that Mike made. He said, never waste a really good crisis. Those crisis opportunities drive massive amounts of emotion, and that emotion can drive tremendous amounts of transformative change for an organization. And I think that's not only true for organizations, but I think that it's also true for us as individuals. Getting back to my earlier comments about the gift of challenge and struggle. And we certainly are seeing crisis like we never have before. So I'm, really honored that and proud of even the reflection that we've done as IWL, and with Kelsey's help. Kelsey serves on our board. This is our promise to the Black community in particular, that when you know better, you must do better. And we will do better to support and accelerate the advancement of Black passions, organizations, careers, and lives. And this is our promise. It is a promise. These are not just words, to make a difference on this journey together and to truly be the change in 2020. And I would say absolutely beyond 2020. So again, it's been a gift to grow in this process over the last few months. There's a strong commitment. And I wanted to, wrap up my intro comments here. First of all, really thanking Salesforce and Rebecca. We Thrive. It's been a gift to be part of this. And another gift has been the opportunity to work with this person. Do you all know who this is? Tamika Catchings. And I'm sure if you're from Indianapolis, you know how amazing she is. And beyond, she's the GM, VP of Operations for the Indiana Fever, amazing 16-year career in the WNBA. This month, I believe she is actually being inducted, probably virtually, into the Basketball Hall of Fame, along with Kobe Bryant and others. But this picture was taken on March 10th. In Louisville. We had our 6th annual conference, March 10th. That day might be a little bit triggering when you think about the coronavirus headwinds. Speaking of wins, it was actually the next day that the NBA stopped playing. And I think the world really began to shut down for several weeks. But Tamika is a remarkable leader. She's focused. She has an interesting story herself that is so inspiring, with dealing with hearing loss and physical disabilities. I just so enjoyed learning more about her story even that day. She's been a great friend to IWL over the years, and I learned a lot about Tamika in her closing keynote. But I think she really closed her keynote with some words that are really powerful that I want to kind of wrap up here with, and that is that you don't get to decide how your story begins, but you do get to decide how your story ends. And I guess I would build on that and say that, in fact, really embrace those wins, because it's going to make your story even more powerful. So with that, I want to turn it over and say thank you to Rebecca, who I look forward to learning more about her story and how she can help us shape our own stories, so that ultimately at the end of the chapter, end of the book, we are truly the best versions of ourselves. So thank you again, Salesforce Women's Network, and thank you, Rebecca. I'm eager to hear your story.
Thanks, Kim. It has been so great to all come together and work together. And I echo earlier sentiments that I don't think we could have strategically planned for this to be any more relevant in terms of timing and just the way the sessions have played out. So good stuff at work. Good stuff at work. So as you know, if you've been following any of the previous sessions, and if you haven't, please go to the YouTube channel and we'll give you that link later to catch up on some of these. But the theme that we've been covering is the difference between striving and thriving. And the word striving comes from the word strife, which means battle and conflict. And the word thrive means to grow, prosper, and flourish. And so I want to start with this idea of story in juxtaposition of how sometimes work can feel. So sometimes at work, it just feels like work, right? Let's go back 3 months ago and the frenetic pace that you were under and this just feeling of I'll never get caught up. It almost feels like just this assembly line that keeps going and it's just work, work, work. And I know now, not only do you have that, but you have family and you have all the things trying to work from home. And it's just been this just massive time of just reflecting on all of these things. And so I want to remind you as we move forward with our work and our lives, that we are not machines. We are beautiful humans here to have impact, add value, and be relevant. Now, many of the work words that we use still today were born out of the transition from an agricultural society into the industrial age. And so the word productivity means to produce, which is about inputs and outputs, which is really a word that's meant for machines and other types of work, not for our human brains, hearts, and emotions. And so sometimes we have this unintended consequence in the words that we use at work, that we start to treat ourselves and others like we are machines here to produce. And I just need us to just pause and reflect, especially during this time and the setup that we've had today, that there's no greater time for us to remind ourselves of our humanity. And in fact, our humanity comes out of our brains, and our brains are wired to thrive. Everything about the way that we move through the world, our brain is begging us to thrive. And there are some specific things that our brain is looking for in order to tell us we're thriving or lead us to thrive, to grow, prosper, and flourish. And so I've broken down some of these things that our brain is looking for. And the two words that I always want to anchor this next slide in that you will be able to remember is reflection and connection. The first aspect of this continuum that our brain is looking for on this thrive journey is all reflection about who we are as a human being. And the second half is all about how we connect with other humans. And so it's important that we remember that this isn't a test, this isn't an assembly line. Our lives are a story. And we use the word story because our brains process information as a story. So when we get information, our brain is thinking about all the aspects of the story, who's involved, what's happening, what's not happening. And so when we honor the fact that our brains process information as a story, we can start to write our story intentionally. So instead of reacting to things as they happen to us, we have the opportunity to reflect and say, who am I? What am I about? What are my unique gifts and talents? How can I use my struggles for good? And how can I not only use them for good, but how can I use them to connect human to human? And so as we show up to work every day, it's important to remember that we bring all of us into our work. And so that requires us to bring not just our brains, but also to bring our heart and our emotions. And anytime we try to hide any aspect of ourselves, the emotional side, the struggles, anytime we try to hide any part of ourselves, we're not being authentic. We hide the best parts of ourselves. And so in order to show up authentically, with empathy, with vulnerability, we have to have the courage to stand tall in our story, both from what we know and also how we feel. And I covered this in a previous session, but I'll touch on it quickly because it's an important aspect of where we're going today. In your brain is a story center. It's all of the experiences that you've had in your lifetime from the time you were a child, even generationally. It's how your grandparents and your parents informed you and taught you and showed you and told you stories. Those became a part of your story center. And now you also have the experiences that you've had in your life. Your story center in your brain has all the books you've read, the TED Talks you've watched, the podcasts you've listened to, the fights you've had with your friends, the experiences you've had on the soccer team, the smell of the grass when you were a child walking to your friend's house for a movie night. Every experience that you've had, good and not so good, and even the horrific, are stored in your story center. And it's in this place, in our own brains, that we possess the capacity and the capability to see another for their unique story. And what happens typically when we don't allow enough time for reflection and connection is we see the world looking for how it impacts our story. My old boss, Dr. Stephen R. Covey, used to say, we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. And there's no greater time and no greater call to a change than to say, it's time to see others for their unique story. And for us to take the time to reflect and say, my goodness, I've been through a lot. And therefore, when I look at another human that I'm working with and I'm interacting with, to absolutely see them for the reality that they've been through a lot too. And when we can see each other for this idea of we each have this unique path, this unique journey that has collectively become our story, and become really curious about someone else's story, this is the real opportunity to reflect and connect. So we can obviously, in this really emotionally charged time, see how this could impact us from so many aspects, from honoring the Black community and their generational struggle, to honoring just the people in our neighborhood for how they're struggling, either economically or just from sheltering in place. Every one of us right now is going through something, and we have to be so in tune to the individuals and their unique story. Because each of us has unique gifts, talents, and abilities that come from these experiences, that come from our hard wiring. We came onto this earth unique, down to our fingerprints. You know, I've said this before, if you look at your fingerprints, none of us have the same pattern. We were meant to be unique. God was not into the die-cast manufacturing of humans. We came here uniquely on purpose and for a purpose. And it's up to us to take these unique gifts, talents, and abilities and give these gifts to another. That's the essence of connection. Our gifts are meant to be given. And so when we reflect upon all the experience that we've had in jobs, in struggles, in relationships, and we bring those wholeheartedly into our lives, into our jobs, into our struggles, we can stand more confidently. We can stand tall in our story, knowing that we are uniquely equipped to face any uncertainty, to face any challenge, and to face any work that we have. So your story matters, especially the struggle, because it's in that struggle that you are reminded of your resilience. You're reminded that you have overcame. You're reminded that you have learned things in that struggle, because our brains don't really start learning until they get uncomfortable. So when things get hard and there's a struggle, our brain immediately perks up and says, okay, we need to pay attention. This is important. So all of those things that have happened, the divorce, the termination, the bad relationship with an old boss, all of the stuff that you just wanted to end, you now have the opportunity to call back to that and say, wait, maybe I can use some of that for my good. So as we think about this idea of standing tall in our story, I want you to think about, just take a minute to reflect. What are some of the struggles, the lessons, the things that you've learned as we've moved through this really uncertain time that we've all been in? I'd love to just have you take a minute and think about that for yourselves, and feel free to pop anything in the chat that you would be so courageous as to share. Let's just take a minute and think about that. Maybe it's too early in the day to vulnerably share our struggles. I'll give it a minute here for you to think about that. I'll share one of mine. So I went through a pretty horrific divorce, as they all are, no matter what side of it you're on. And through that struggle, I learned so much about the power of my own emotions to drive my day. I learned that in spite of challenge, you can choose to come to the other side better, not bitter. And it came from intentionally paying attention to my emotions, my triggers, choosing optimism, looking back on the day with gratitude no matter how hard it was. These practices that I put in place for myself have made me a far better mom, a better consultant, a better ex-wife. My ex-husband and I are now finally friends after a lot of struggle. And so it's in that struggle time, a full 3 years of just reflection on my own needs and emotions, that I'm able to use those practices today. And so it is in these times of struggle that we learn so much about ourselves. Kim says, you've learned in this time to be really present in the moment. I think that's definitely a theme I've heard from some of my other clients as well. Kelsey says, trying to get comfortable having uncomfortable conversations with family and friends. Oh my gosh, I echo that in such a challenging way. Social media has allowed me to see inside the hearts of some people that I've grown up with that I didn't realize what was there. And it's struggle. It's a big struggle for me to decide how to handle that. Kalpana says, I'm at the end of my journey of a similar 3 years of struggle and introspection, coming out better now and about to take a leap of faith. You go, girl. I love hearing that. That gives me chills because I can just feel what that has been like for you. So I wanted to take that time just to allow yourselves to feel. because we are busy all the time. And when we don't take that time and reflection to feel, we don't tap into our story centers in a meaningful way that allows us to use that all for good. Because when we don't show up, we leave a piece of the puzzle that needs to be there. Whether it's our jobs or our families or our neighborhood or the tough conversation that we need to have to stand up for one of our Black friends because somebody else doesn't get it. Every time we don't show up, the picture is less beautiful and it's not nearly as strong as it could have been. And so in this time of talking about your story matters, I want us to think about it in terms of the emotional aspect. And I also want to talk a little bit about the economic impact, because everything that we're going through has economic impact. And so when we think about this reflection and connection, at the top of this continuum of living out a Thrive story is your value, your status, and another word that doesn't have room on the screen is your relevance. So I want to talk about what that means to be valuable and relevant at work. Because the truth of the matter is, money matters. It matters to all of us. And money is actually, it is a requirement for all aspects of our lives. At home, at work, our churches need it, our nonprofits need it, our schools need it. Money is the language that we do life with. But money is actually neutral. It's a neutral commodity. You can take the same amount of money and start a strip club or a nonprofit. Money gets its value from the story. So we always start with story, but we don't ever want to leave out the money-making model. Because how we use our story to fuel the money-making model is how the business grows, how we grow. And if we don't grow our businesses, we don't have the ability to grow the programs and the services and the impact that we can have on our communities. And Salesforce is a beautiful example of a company that takes their money-making model and absolutely cares about the stories of humanity. Salesforce probably does it better than any other clients that I've worked with. And so it's our responsibility when we show up every day in our jobs to know the money-making model and to know the story of what our company is trying to accomplish. Because we individually each have a story, but our companies have a story as well. So my company's story at WeThrive.live is to bring about this change and understanding that business is human. And we want to ban burnout, build community, and boost business. So everything I do with my partners and in my business, that's the story that I'm writing for my business. And I'm showing up every day with my unique gifts and talents, and I'm asking partners to join me that have their unique gifts and talents that care about the same story. So the story of your business gets fueled by the money-making model. So the next time you see a chart or a graph or a representation of your business, I want you to reflect and take that moment to remember this is not a factory. This is not separate from our humanity. That chart and graph representing the money-making model is meant to fuel the humanity of the people that work inside the organization, the customers that you serve, and the community that you can impact with what you do with that story-money combination. So, when you think about that and you come to work every day, rather than think about the overwhelming list of tasks and activities and busyness. Did you know that the word business actually comes from the root word busyness? Right? I mean, we're busy, but just checking things off the list doesn't give our brains that sense of satisfaction that we get when we remember that all of those tasks in some way connect to another human. And there's this ripple effect that happens when you do your work thinking about impact versus productivity. Productivity is, how can I get to inbox 0 and get the monkey off my back? Inputs, outputs. How can I just move the stuff around like it's on a factory assembly line? Impact says, I'm going to look at my task list and I'm going to know why. I'm going to know why it matters. I'm going to know who it matters for. So I'll give you a really simple example that came out of one of my keynote speeches a while back. Back in the day when I would be in a room with human beings and it was so beautiful. Gosh, I miss it. I was talking about this concept of looking at your task list and knowing why. And I ask people to just reflect on that for a moment, to look at their task list for the day and ask, do they know why they're doing the things that they're doing? And how would it impact how they felt about the list when they gave themselves a chance to reflect on it? So I gave them a few minutes, and one of the ladies raised her hand and she said, I've been dreading all day that I have to go to Kohl's this afternoon to buy khaki pants for my husband for a casual wedding that he's in for his niece in a couple weeks, our niece in a couple weeks. She goes, I've been cranky about it. I don't want to go across town. I don't want to go to Kohl's. I don't want to do it. And she said, now I'm sitting here thinking that my husband and his niece have the most beautiful relationship. He's one of the most profound influences in her life, and how proud I am that he's my husband. And she said, all of a sudden, it doesn't feel so awful to go across town to get to Kohl's for the khaki pants. Now, of course, it was an emotional story, and then somebody else was kind enough to give her a 30% off coupon for Kohl's. But really, what we can do is we can see our work based on impact and emotions. And it's important that we do this. I'm going to share another quick story, and then I'm going to give you some time to reflect. In an article in Fast Company magazine in the late 90s called Change or Die, there was a study of a group of cardiology patients who were given the diagnosis that if they didn't, in fact, change their behaviors, they were going to die. Now, one would maybe assume that if death is the option, that you could change your behavior. But in fact, only 27%, I believe, changed. What they learned in that study was that in order to change our behaviors, there are two things that need to be in play. One of them is there needs to be an emotional, joyful component to the change. So instead of fearing death, the ones that changed looked forward to something joyful in their future and in their lives. One said, I want to make sure I live to be in my daughter's wedding. Another was something about wanting to see a grandchild graduate, something futuristic that was joyful and emotional and gave them this sense of thriving. The other aspect was that they had support. Somebody was in that story with them. And so as we think about our daily work and we think about all that we've been through, this is our opportunity to say, what can I build and create in the future for my story and for the others that I'm a part of their story? And to think more about the impact of our work and our lives in a futuristic, optimistic, joyful state. Because we make decisions on emotions, we validate them on facts. And so those charts and graphs of our work are critical. It's how we can tell if we're winning or not. It's how we can course correct. But all of that needs to connect back into our story center of knowing why it matters. What's the impact that we're having in our work? So I want you to take a minute and I want you to think about, how could that change things for you in your task list today or tomorrow or next week? Just take a minute and kind of think through your list of the things that you've got that you need to get done and ask yourself, how would that look differently if you were thinking about the human impact of the task? Let's just take a minute. And please feel free to add to the chat. And Kim, I do look at business story as its why. That's exactly how I see it. Anybody have any examples of how they see their task list differently when they think about the human connection? Not very chatty today, you group. No worries. All right. I hope that's helpful. And I hope as you do your weekly planning, that is a part of your weekly planning process. And I'll add two aspects of that. One, when you're sitting down to do your task list, think of the human connection. The second thing I'll add when you're doing your weekly planning is don't leave out your intuition in your planning. Your story center is full of a lot of past experience and a lot of just innate knowing that came from your past experience. So it's important that we tap into that as much as we tap into the latest podcast we've listened to or report that we've studied. Okay, so as we think about our work and how it impacts humans, we all immediately go to the org chart. Oh, let's see. We've got a couple of people chatting. Yay. Kim says, triggering some thoughts about reframing task lists for others, presenting differently to help them connect emotionally and joyfully. Good. Oh my gosh, it makes such a difference. We'll talk more about how to use that. It's sometimes difficult to run errands that seem like drudgery, but they help move the family and yourself forward to feel good. So that helps. So true. So true. Considering impact makes me feel connected and like I can make a difference. Task lists feel very siloed and isolated. Amen, Vicky. So let's talk a little bit more about that siloed comment. So we all can probably tell exactly where we are on the org chart, right? The organizational chart. And most of work systems, process, and communication happens through the structure of an organizational chart. It is part of this industrial age model from decades ago that said that we should separate our work out into departments and fragments of the organization to make it easier to measure and optimize. It was a move that allowed us to be more efficient. But if you think about the way that work gets done or where the challenges happen in our work, it largely happens across the organization more so than up and down. You think about how your department's work goes to another department, which then goes to another department, more of a supply chain look at our work. So where we have the most opportunity to add additional impact, value, and relevance isn't on the up and down of the org chart. Those systems already exist. And in some cases, they're really effective. And in some cases, they make things really hard. Because you think about the time it takes to get information all the way up and all the way back down, especially in an organization the size of yours, it can be really difficult. So I'm going to suggest, rather than just depending on the org chart for your communication and your value and your impact, that you see your work more like a relay track team, because it's the handoff of a relay track team that's the most important aspect of the race. And if you think about your work and the way it gets handed off from one department to the next, and the time it takes to take that information up the chain and back down the chain of an org chart to fix or improve things, that can take a really long time. And then it sometimes becomes like the telephone game, and lots of things get lost in translation and things just get hard. We have the ability as humans to say, I'm just going to go and get to know the other humans in the department where I get my work from and where my work goes to. Because if I understand their story, I have an opportunity to improve my work human to human. Now, if you ask any track coach who has coached a relay team, they'll tell you that there are two aspects that happen when the handoff doesn't go well. One is you're probably not going to win the race. But what do you think the second consequence is when a handoff doesn't go well in a race? Anybody want to guess? The team breaks down. Exactly, Vicki. There's a lack of trust that exists. And if we wait for trust to be taught in a classroom or trust to be built by going up and down the org chart, it's going to take a long time, people. We have the opportunity to say, let me go get to know these people in this other department, have a conversation and how we could maybe work better together. I promise you, if and when you choose to do that, your value, impact, and relevance in your organization will go up exponentially. It was one of my superpowers throughout my career, is rather than wait for permission, I got to know the other people in my organization that were a part of the work, but not necessarily on my immediate team. And it allowed me to make decisions that not only impacted my work and theirs, it gave me an edge in the organization in terms of my value. And leaders love it when you take the initiative to understand how the work gets done. So we need to know not only the company story, but we need to know the money-making model of the business. We need to make it our responsibility to know how our department impacts the money-making model of the business and to ask the right questions so that when we offer ideas of innovation or change, we can do it with both story and money as part of the conversation. And when you can do that, that's how you build a really great business case. Now, another aspect of knowing the money-making model and how business gets done across the organization is it allows you to be more discerning about what you can stop doing. Because y'all, there's a whole lot of stuff that's on your list that is not having much impact at all. And the way that you can get more focused, have more value, is to get some crap off your list. Stuff that doesn't have impact. Look at your list and say, what impact, out of the things I have on my task list, what are the things that are going to have profound impact to the story of our organization and to the money-making model, to the bottom line? And you don't have to have a finance degree. You just need to know how money comes in and how money gets spent and what happens with what's left over. Because in fact, every day when you show up to work on the spreadsheet, people are an expense. We don't add value to the organization until we start adding value to the organization. And so it's our responsibility to show up and say, how can I add value to the story and to the money-making model so that this organization can continue to serve the employees, serve the customers, and serve the community. So I'm going to challenge you for next week to ask yourself, what are you going to mark off your list? What are those things that you're going to stop doing so that you can put a stronger degree of emotion, effort to the impact that you can have to the story and the money-making model of the organization? Because when we remove some of the excess and get more laser focused on the things that have greater impact, that's when we can truly have impact to the profit and loss statement of our organization. And this is an important aspect of our responsibility of using our stories. So to show up, just to recap, to show up and say, you know what? My story center is full of so many experiences. It's full of knowledge, data, information that I've gained from classes I've taken and podcasts I've listened to and videos I've watched. It has information based on the struggle. Like, you know stuff. You know lots of stuff. And when we can show up and say, I'm here. Hello, I'm here. I'm ready. I'm uniquely gifted to do a great job in my work today. And how is that going to impact the other humans on my team, on the other teams and the other departments that my work gets passed to and from, to the community? The human-to-human impact is how we really fuel the bottom line of our organization. So I'm going to pause and see if anybody has questions. I also know Salesforce well enough to know that you've got another meeting that starts in 7.5 minutes, and you're already starting to think about that. So how can I help you by answering any questions based on what we've covered today about your story matters? The emotional aspect as well as the money-making model. Any questions or feedback or thoughts? Well, feel free to keep adding comments. I'm happy to stay on and answer any questions, but I would love to stay connected, and there's lots of ways that we can do that. I have a podcast called the Badass Women's Council that I'd love you to subscribe to and be a part of that conversation. Also follow us on Instagram, and an online community that I have for career women, where you can find us is badasswomenscouncil.community. And it's a place for you to connect with other career women and get to know them and their stories and support each other in a really authentic way. And as always, this recording will be put up on our YouTube channel. And there is a playlist specifically for Salesforce where you can find all the past sessions that we've done. And the future ones will be posted there as well. So Kylie says, my head is spinning, so much to think about. I hope that's a good thing.
It is. It absolutely is.
And Kelsey says, I love a good list, but thinking about how that list actually delivers impact can shift the list in priority. I hope so. I know I've spent a lot of time just trying to, quote unquote, get caught up, but not really paying attention to the impact that I was having. And since making that change, I'm more calm, and I think I'm making more of a difference. So I dig it. Thank you. I love this. I don't want this to end in a couple weeks, by the way. And you know, Alex Perry, who's been a part of these sessions, she messaged me this morning. She had another keynote to deliver today. She was like, I don't want it to end. So thank you for bringing such a meaningful part of our weeks over the last few.
Yeah, of course. And thank you, Rebecca. These are always so powerful. So Kylie did drop a link to a survey. Please provide your feedback just to give us a good perspective of what's landing, what's not, what we can do better. And of course, if you want to continue hearing about some of this great content from both of these amazing organizations, We Thrive and IWL, drop your information in there. And again, we love seeing your feedback. We've already had some responses come in, so thank you. It always warms our soul, especially we all need a little joy in our days as we progress here. So thank you all again for joining. We'll share the recording on the playlist, and we will see you same place, same time, talking about your style story next week with Nicole. So thanks again, Rebecca and Kim, and have a great rest of your week. It's Friday Eve, people. We're almost to the weekend. So thank you all. Talk to you later.
You.
Take
Bye.
care.